Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another exciting episode in the Kotlin Messenger series. Really hope you guys are doing well today, and I really hope you guys are able to follow along with the very last lesson. I know we did a lot, so if you have any questions or comments, make sure to leave them down below. In today's lesson, we are going to move on from the last episode, and we're going to further flesh out our application with some more additional features. So the question here is, what exactly are we going to learn in today's video? Well, I'm going to show you exactly that by going over today's agenda in the top right over there. So for episode 2, what we are going to do first is we're going to create a Firebase application in the Firebase console. So what that means is we're going to have to head on over to console.firebase.google.com and create our application. It actually doesn't take too long, so we'll just spend a brief moment on that website. Once we are able to do that successfully, we'll move on to installing the proper Firebase SDKs inside of our Android application. And that's going to require us to use the Gradle files inside of Android Studio. Now, once we have that installed correctly, we're going to authenticate ourselves by making 2 different calls using the Firebase SDKs. The first call is to create a user with email and password. And so that's going to help us create a brand new account inside of our Firebase area. And then secondly, we'll have to log back into that new account using this method called sign in with email and password. So luckily for us today, the Firebase SDK is extremely easy to work with. So this bit of code right here shouldn't take too long for us to take care of. All right, so last but not least, we're going to take care of some of the UI for our application. The first of which is to sort of round off some of the corner edges inside of our UI. This is the completed version of our application, and it looks a lot nicer, right? The rounded UI really adds a bit of flair to our application. And then the last thing we'll take care of is some keyboard management. So what exactly do I mean? Well, you'll notice that when I try to fill out this UI or the fields over here, the UI is actually being blocked by the keyboard down below. So in order to fix this issue, we'll have to introduce a scroll view for our registration activity. So that's pretty interesting, and if we have enough time, I'll show you how to take care of that. Okay, so that's pretty much all we're going to learn in today's video, and it might seem like a little bit much, but I'll walk you through how to do all of this stuff step by step. We're gonna get started by going back into Android Studio and pick up where we left off in the last lesson. So let's get started right now. Alrighty, everybody, welcome back to good old Android Studio over here. Now, the first thing I would like to do is to actually just run this application with all of the code we have so far, right? And so let me remind you where we left off in the last lesson. And basically, let me tap on the register button a few times. Taking a look at Logcat down below, we see that email is blank and password is also blank. Those 2 messages are being logged out on line 19 and line 20 as well. So that's kind of where we left off in the registration page inside of main activity. And let me also click on already have account. I went ahead and implemented this screen that kind of looks like this right now, right? So pretty basic. That screen is inside of res layout activity login. So here is the layout file. The login activity has a little bit of code inside of it. So if I tap the login button, we'll see a different message down below. If we change the filter over here to login, you see that we are attempting to log in with email and password over there. Now, the last thing is that if I click on this message or this text view down below, we are going to finish this activity, and that is just going to exit out of the login activity, bringing us back to main activity over here. Okay, so that's where we left off. And the question now is, how do we proceed in today's lesson? Well, we are going to try to authenticate our user using Firebase Auth somehow. And so how exactly do we do that? Well, we have to create an application inside of Firebase first. So I'm going to drag in my favorite browser, which is Chrome. You can feel free to use whatever you want. Just head on over to console.firebase.google.com and create your Firebase account. And once you do that, you should be presented with a page that looks kind of like this. You want to create a new project, so hit that button. I've already created my Kotlin Messenger project over here, so I'm going to use this. And you should have some kind of page that tells you to get started, and you want to create an application using one of these buttons here. So obviously we don't want to use that one. We want to use this Android button instead. So click on that. And now you're presented with a screen that tells you to add Firebase to your Android app. You want to register your application first. So the Android package name is probably the most important thing to fill out in this form. You want to click on this guy, and it says that your package name is generally the application ID inside of your app level build.gradle file. And so that might sound a little bit confusing, but I'll show you where to find that information. And you just want to make sure you're inside of the Android view mode over here. And let's see, let's open up the app build Gradle, which is this guy. You should be able to find the application ID here. So just copy all of this bit of text and just copy that and just paste it inside of that field over there. And you should be good to go. I'm going to go ahead and skip these two optional fields and just hit the register app button. And there you go. You want to download your Google Services JSON file. So that's where it is right now. It's inside of my downloads directory. And right here, it kind of tells you how to drag that file into your project. So it tells you to switch back over to the project mode. So let's just do that, project mode. And you want to make sure you kind of expand this app directory like so. And I have my Google Services file over here. So let me drag that into the app directory, hit the OK to actually insert that file inside of your project. And you should be okay. Just make sure you are kind of inside of the app directory. If you open up the Google Services JSON file, you'll see some information regarding your actual project inside of Firebase. It's not that important, but that's kind of what is inside of that JSON file. The project is actually going to use this to connect correctly and successfully to your Firebase project. So make sure to have this step completed successfully. And here we go. Go back into the Android mode, and we are going to continue on with the rest of this setup process. You just want to hit the next over there. And this step is probably going to be confusing as well if you've never messed with the build.gradle file. So your project actually has two Gradle files. You have the project right there, and you also have the application Gradle file. So the first step is to modify the project one, and you want to install the Google Services dependency. So copy that, and let me drag that back down. Open up your project guy, and right below these comments inside of the dependencies, you want to just paste that line in there, and you should be able to sync, but I'm going to skip that for now. I'm going to sync a little bit later on, and we're going to actually modify the app Gradle file. So dependencies, copy this line, and then go back down to, let's see, build a Gradle for your app. And over here down below, inside of the dependencies, you just want to add that one line of code. And then lastly, we want to apply the plugin of Google Services. So add this to the bottom of the file. So copy that. And then we are going to go all the way down, hit a couple of spaces. And now we are ready to synchronize our project. And what that really means is it's going to install all of the dependencies for your project. And that looks pretty good. If you leave this as compile, you'll have this error down below. And the problem is that the documentation is a little bit obsolete. You want to make sure the compile uses implementation instead. And making that change, now you can successfully install all the SDKs, and you can also run the application again. You can ignore this error for now. I'm not exactly sure why it's showing up, but there's a red line over there, so just ignore it. Don't be too concerned. And there we go. Our application is now up and running. If you go back into the documentation, you can complete this last step by just hitting the next. And because I've already installed and ran my application, it tells me that my application was successfully added to Firebase. All right. So this message might look a little bit different, but once you connect, it'll show you this successful message, kind of like that in the green. So we are pretty much done with that step, and we're going to continue on to the console area. So here is the application that we just created. The application ID for you is probably going to look a little bit different. So make sure you have that correct. And let's move on to the next step, which is to open up the authentication panel on the left side. I already have one user called test0@gmail.com. I can actually delete this guy and just make sure we start off from a fresh blank slate like so. And head on over to the sign-in method. So in today's lesson, we're actually going to use the email and password authentication method. So make sure to enable this guy. It actually defaults as disabled, so make sure to enable it and then hit the save, and you should be good to go there. And what we would like to do now is to actually register our user over here inside of the Firebase system somehow. And the way to do that is to actually go back into main activity, which is this screen, and down over here inside of the onCreate onClickListener method, you can type in some code now and you can say Firebase Auth or something like that, but we don't have the last SDK installed just yet. So what exactly do I mean? Well, we actually need access to Firebase Auth. So you can search for Firebase Auth Android to look at the documentation. So click on the first link and it'll bring you into the kind of the description page for what exactly this guy is. So make sure to read that. And I'm going to skip this part and just head on over to get started with Firebase inside of the Android section. And it tells you how to install the Auth SDK. What you got to do is you got to modify your build.gradle file again with this line of code. So, copy that line, and let me just drag that out of the way again. I will remove that line of code, and let's see, go back to the build Gradle for your app file, and right there we will copy and paste and sync it one more time with the Firebase Auth SDK. And now you can head back over to main activity, and inside of here you can now say Firebase Auth like so, and you can get access to the actual authenticator inside of your project now. Okay, so that completes the installation process of all of the necessary Firebase SDKs for us in today's lesson. And now we are going to actually move on to registering a user using a method on this instance guide. So how do we do that? Well, you can read the documentation a little bit further down below on that same page. So what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to get the instance like what we just did. And on that instance, you are supposed to call create user with email and password. And you're also supposed to add some kind of completion listener on this guy. Now, all of this is actually written in Java. So what we are going to do is I'm going to show you how this works in Kotlin, which is very, very similar. The code is actually a little bit cleaner, so you'll see the difference right now. All right, so for this line of code, Firebase Auth get instance, we have to call that same method of create user with email and password. And this requires us to pass in two strings. So the first string is the email from up above over there, and then the second string is the password. So let me just paste that in there. And for the completion listener, you just want to hit enter and hit dot and say add completion listener like so. Now the syntax for this is a little bit tricky if you're new to Kotlin, but you can just use a brace. And whenever you have this bit of syntax, you'll get access to the actual result by using this it variable. So it is a task result. And so you can access things on it like is successful, is complete, and is canceled. So what we are going to do is we're going to first check if the actual creation was successful using this line. So let me show you what that code looks like with if is successful like so. And I'm actually going to say if it's not successful. So if not successful, I'm just going to return like so. And for Kotlin, you have to add this bit of syntax into this code here. So make sure to do that. And the next thing we will do here is this else case is if successful over here. So this portion of the code is when we created our user successfully. And so down here, we are simply going to log a message down below in logcat over here. So let's say log d. For the tag, I'm just going to type in main. And the message over here will say successfully. Hopefully I typed that out correctly. Logged in, created user with UID. And the UID of our user, you can access it using this right here. So I'm just going to use interpolation of it.result.user.uid like that. All right, so quite a bit of code, but that's kind of what you need to type out there. And if you compare it to Java, this is actually a lot more lines of code. This row over here is probably just 1 or 2 lines, and it looks pretty clean, right? So having written all of that, we are going to run this code inside of our emulator now, and hopefully we can see this message in Logcat. I'm going to change the filter over here to just main, and now I'm going to log in as a new user, so test 0 or test 1, whatever you want. And for the password, make sure to type in something meaningful, and we are going to register. And finally, at the very last line of Logcat, we've created our user with the UID of E6PAX, right? So this ID, you can actually confirm inside of Firebase that your user does indeed exist. So let me show you what that looks like by going back into users. And now we have test1@gmail.com with E6PAX. If you need to refresh your list of users, you can hit that button over there, and your users should be created successfully. And that's how you create your very first user using Firebase Auth. You can see that it's pretty easy, right? So everything looks pretty good to me. However, one thing that you do have to watch out for is every time you have empty strings inside of your email and password fields like so, if you hit the register button right now, you'll actually crash your application because your strings are empty or null. So this is the error message down below. And so you have to watch out for this by checking if these are actually indeed empty. And the way to do that is pretty simple. You can say if email.isEmpty or password.isEmpty. I'm just going to return like so. Now let's try to run this again. And you'll see that if I hit the register button with empty text fields, your application should still be okay. So that looks pretty good. If you want to make something a little bit more meaningful, you can actually use a brace over here. You can use something called a toast inside of Android, and you can make a toast. And I'll use the context of this. The actual message will be something like, please enter text in email, so email password. And for this guy, you just want to say toast.length short or length long. And finally, make sure to show this toast. And we're going to finally return like so. And let me run this one more time. You'll basically see a message down below. So hit the register right there, and you'll see, please enter text in email and password. All right, so that's kind of how that works. And if you want to actually check if your creation was done successfully, you pretty much have to add a different listener onto this function here. So what I mean is you can say .add failure listener, and this guy has this exception, okay? So that's what the it is inside of this lambda expression. So this is kind of a lambda expression here. So what we want to do is log another message. We'll say this is main again. The message will be failed to create user, and we'll just log out the message with it.message like that. So let me show you what this looks like right now, and I'll just run my app. And you'll see that if I type in just test over here, and let's see, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, register, you'll see that the actual failure message is a lot more explicit. So it says the email address is badly formatted like that. And so obviously you want to change this to something that makes more sense. So @gmail.com, and then hit the register like so, and you'll get another user inside of your system. So 0xw is now going to show up right over there, 0xw over there. So that's pretty good, right? Now, before we move on to the next feature, I would like to show you how we can refactor some of this code so that our onCreate method isn't so messy, right? So there's quite a bit of logic inside of this method currently. And so I'm going to cut all of this code over here on my onClick listener. And I'm just going to call a separate method called perform register. And so this method will exist down below over here. So let's create a private function, and we'll call it perform register. And I'll just paste all that code that I copied out. And because this is just a plain old function, we don't need to return this onClick listener guy. So let's just remove that, and we can run our code again. We should be okay. So I believe this guy still needs that, so let's just run it with it, and our code should be fine. Let's just confirm that we can still register a user, so test3@gmail.com, and let's see, punch in a password, check in the logcat, and we created another user like so. All right, so that is pretty good. And the next thing you probably want to do is to go inside of the already have account activity. And so this is login activity over here. And in order to perform the login, it's actually very similar. So I'll show you what that code sort of looks like right now. So Firebase Auth and get the instance. And instead of calling create user, you just want to say sign in with email and password. And this guy takes in the email and password like so. All right, so I'm not going to implement the rest of this. I'll leave this as a challenge for you. So you want to add the completion listener as well as, let's see, the add failure listener somewhere up here. So I'll just comment that out for now. And the next thing I would like to show you how to do is to go back into the main activity. And so whenever the registration process actually fails, so let's head back over here. So let's say the email is incorrect, like test4 or something, right? Hit the register. You'll see that we failed to create, but the UI doesn't really show us anything. So we are going to follow the same pattern of using a toast. So I'm just going to copy that. And for the failure, failed to create, let's also present a toast like that. And so this message will just copy that and paste that inside of this string there. And so that is a pretty good message. Let's see what that looks like inside of our UI. So just test and 1, 2, 3, register, and you'll see a toast right above the keyboard over there. Okay, so pretty awesome. And now what I would like to do is to kind of show you how to make our UI look a little bit better. It's currently very blocky and squared off for all these text fields. And we're going to actually want to implement some circular text fields instead. And that looks like this over here. So this is the circular text fields in the middle right there. And that looks a lot nicer, right? So how exactly do we do that inside of Android, right? Well, we are going to open up the resource directory and open it up, let's see, activity main here. And that's what this screen over here is. So let me show you how to make the username circular on the left and right edges. And the way to do that is to head on over to the drawable resource directory, right click on that and create a new drawable resource file. This guy, I'm going to call it rounded. So rounded edit text, so text, and we'll call this, let's see, register. And I'll also use login as well. Okay, so this guy defaults as a selector for this component tree thing. We don't really want to use that, and instead we want to use a shape drawable instead. So I'm going to say shape. And inside of this guy, we can provide it with a couple of different things. So let's say corner. So corners is over here. You get a radius, so radius. And because I know this text field has a height of 50, we just want to give the radius of half of the height with 25 dp and just close that off like so. And one other property that you can give it is something called a solid. Now solid is going to have a color, and for this you can give it a color of white like that. And once you do that, you will see the shape actually show up on the right side over there. You might have some errors, but if you are not able to see this, you should be able to see a red dot over there, and just click on that and then refresh the display. All right. So now the question is, what exactly do I do with this rounded drawable thing? Well, you can go back into activity and login, which is this guy, and let's actually go into activity main. And for the username, which is this over here, so this is actually the username. For the background, instead of just using this white color, you can say background. And now you can say drawable, and there's a rounded edit text register login. And the moment that you change it, what you'll see is that the username text field is now completely round like so. And I'm just going to run the app one more time, and you'll see that change appear inside of the emulator on the right side. And so that's how we get the rounded edge. You probably want to just do this 2 more times for the 2 text fields below. So you want to replace the background and the background over here as well. Okay, so running this one more time, you'll see those edges rounded off. And the last thing we have to do is to fix this register button to be rounded off as well. And the only thing different about the register button is that it has a green background color like that, and the text is a little bit different as well. So to implement this register round button, we're going to create a new drawable resource just to represent the rounded, button, whatever you want to call it is fine. So hit OK. And inside of the text area, we'll create the shape again. And let's see, for the solid, so solid, I want to give it a background color. And for the color, we will say Android, and we will use the dark green color. So that's the dark green that we need. Let me close that off. And I'll also give it the corners, and we'll have radius like that. And I know it's also 50 dp in height, so let me just give it 25 dp for the radius. And we should be good to go here. We are going to use this resource file now instead of activity main. So the register button is this guy down here. For the background, we don't have one yet, so why don't we add the background, and we'll say a rounded button like so. And you'll see that it appears over there. If you want to change the text to something else, so text color, we can say Android and white. That will come up. You can say text style and give it a bold, and you can run your application one more time. And what will happen is the emulator will kind of show up. The UI looks a lot nicer, right? Alrighty guys, so seeing as how this lesson is getting a little bit more on the longer side, what I'm going to do is to just simply end the lesson here. And I'm going to present you with 2 different challenges for you to complete on your own time. And so let me show you what those challenges are right now inside of the emulator. And so I would like you to improve the UI of our registration screen just a little bit. And I would like you to include a circular button all the way at the top there. And so let me show you what that looks like in the completed app. And it looks like this, right? So this is our circular select photo button, and all of these elements align right underneath it. And so to get this circular button inside of your registration screen, all you gotta do is to drag a button inside of your layout file, and then you also want to create a new drawable resource so that you can get it perfectly round like that. Okay, so that's the first challenge. And the second challenge is to actually finish up the login activity so that we can have rounded components kind of like this over here. Now in the very next lesson, we'll finally get to the keyboard management feature of our application, and that's going to allow us to slide the UI up and down while the keyboard is up like that. And we will also allow the user to register a photo for their account by clicking on that button, selecting a photo like that, and then registering this inside of Firebase storage. And so hopefully you're excited for the very next lesson. If you want to download any of the source code that you saw in today's video, you can find a link in the description below. Hopefully you found this video helpful. I will see you in the very next lesson. Bye bye guys.